How will we power our future? Can we create a healthy and clean economy? Climate One at the Commonwealth Club is at the forefront of the global debate about energy, economy, and the environment. Bringing together the brightest and most provocative leaders of our time, Climate One is the place where big ideas get heard. With thoughtful and insightful discussions on policy, business, science, and culture, Climate One founder Greg Dalton gets to the heart of the matter. It's our future. It's time to come together.
The left and the right come together. Tea Party co-founder and clean energy advocate Debbie Dooley joins Christine Pelosi of the Democratic National Committee for a discussion about the politics of energy more than a year into the Trump presidency. Climate One starts now. Debbie Dooley, tell us how you went from growing up as the daughter of a Baptist preacher in Louisiana to being the early founder of the Tea Party, now advocating for clean energy.
Well, I've always been somewhat of a rebel. If you know any preacher's kids, I mean, you probably understand that, they're very rebellious, want to make their own way. But growing up, I have always cared about the environment because I believe as a Christian that we should not destroy what God created. We should not destroy the earth that God created. I believe in, I oppose bailouts. I believe in individual liberty and freedom. And I have been active in Republican politics since 1976, since I was in high school. And I've been volunteered as a political activist. I got pretty upset with the Republican Party under George W. Bush's administration. I was appalled with the Wall Street bailouts. I think a lot of the CEOs should have ended up in jail like most of us would have been. And so I was one of the 22 people that co-founded the Tea Party movement, but the Tea Party movement actually really began under George W. Bush. If you go to a Tea Party rally and you mention his name or Karl Rove's name, you'll get a lot of sneers. And so it was a natural fit. I've gotten to a very big public fight with an electric monopoly, Georgia Power, over Plant Vogtle. These are 2 nuclear reactors they're building. And I found out with the massive cost overruns that were projected, they were making a guaranteed profit off of the cost overruns. I felt like that was a bailout. And I'm like, why should we reward irresponsibility of this corporation, of this monopoly? And I opposed it, and I began to look for ways to provide competition and choice, to find a better way to provide energy than these expensive nuclear reactors. I started investigating clean energy and solar and found out a lot of the things that I had been told for years about solar energy were not true. Mm-hmm. And so I began to be a very strong solar energy advocate. And I, often butt heads with I sneer. I will try to keep from sneering when I say the name Koch brothers, but I really don't like them because I fight a lot of their groups in different states nationwide, and I am thrilled to be here, and being good stewards of the environment God gave us should not be a partisan issue.
Christine Pelosi, I'm not sure how rebellious you are, but certainly grew up in politics. So tell us your story, how you got to where you are, growing up with a political family in California, very much the environment part of that. Tell us your story.
Well, I did grow up here in San Francisco. My husband, Peter, father-in-law, Phil Kaufman, filmmakers, and my daughter, Bella, are here with us. I'm very excited about that. When I was about Bella's age, my mom had 5 kids within 6 years. So my parents, very devout Catholics, Italian Catholics, had all these kids. And we were at the Calmart over in Laurel Village, for those of you locals who know where it is. And my sister Jacqueline was trying to get some Pepperidge Farm cookies, and I was insisting that we couldn't get the cookies because they were owned by Campbell Soup, and Campbell Soup was abusing the farm workers in the field, and therefore no Pepperidge Farm cookies. And Jacqueline's like, Mom, you said politics wasn't going to be in our lives. And because my mom was a northern chair of the state Democratic Party. And but the fact is, politics is in all our lives,
right.
And that's just the way it is. And now it's the same thing when we talk about justice for farm workers. I'm quite active in the Me Too politics movement. We said enough, so we're very concerned about the food safety program for workers in the field. We're concerned about Me Too STEM and all of the women who've been locked out of the climate science discussion because they've been harassed or their work co-opted. So there's a lot of justice around picking out the cookies in the supermarket or participating in making consumer choices. I have gone on to serve in my own right, elected to the Democratic Party, the National Committee. And I laugh when you said how much of a rebel am I, because actually I've been fighting for years the role of corporate money in politics. And last October, convinced my colleagues at the Democratic National Committee to not take predatory money. So no nuclear, no guns, no tobacco, no money that conflicts with our platform.
Debbie Dooley, why is there such a gap between the Republican rank and file in the country and their elected leaders? We heard that the Trump voters support research into renewable energy, want to attack carbon pollution, and yet that's not what people in Congress and even the administration are doing.
Follow the money. I mean, that's what it all, I mean, that's that simple. Follow the money.
I think she's right. I would echo that on the Democratic side before you get to me. Same thing, follow the money, because I think that our activists, we just had our Democratic state convention recently in California, and again, our activists are against fracking. Not all of our candidates for governor are out here on the Democratic side. In fact, the strangest thing, a few years ago in 2014, when I came out against fracking, I actually got death threats on Twitter. Who threatens to kill somebody over opposition to fracking? But it was interesting because, as it turns out, we're California, we're San Francisco, earthquake country, hopefully. Right. Not during this broadcast. But when you look at the earthquakes that are happening, the USGS studies, the earthquakes that are happening in Ohio, that are happening in Oklahoma, and that do have a connection to fracking, again, follow the money. We only really won the rhetorical point when the head of Exxon, as it turns out, opposed fracking on his block because he just bought a new house and he didn't want to contaminate his drinking water. And so he said, see, all right, now there's a market-based solution for you, but it's still there. So I do think you have to follow the money in both parties and say, if you took out the big money and you took out the money that's funding the think tank-based studies and you just looked at the facts, I would bet you most of the decisions would be made closer to where the people are, which I think there is a climate action majority in the country.
Christine Pelosi, let's talk about the politics in Congress. There's something called the Climate Solutions Caucus, where Republicans and Democrats are coming together. They call it the Noah's Ark. It's led by a congressman from southern Florida, which is slowly disappearing. Is there any hope for any deal where can there be a deal in this Congress on some of these climate issues? Is it infrastructure? You can't name it climate, but is it infrastructure? Are there any deals that can be made?
I think that there are deals that can be made when they put together the budget, not the president's current budget, certainly not the solar tariffs that he just recently announced that the two of us oppose vehemently. Right. Yes. That when we look at infrastructure, really building, and we had this conversation a year ago, and we actually thought there was going to be an infrastructure bill, but you have to think of build, build, build. You want to build out with clean energy. You want to build out in a way that is good paying jobs. And you also want to build out in a way that is accessible to all, particularly people with disabilities. Because if you're talking about building, whether it's public housing, whether it's roads, whether it's public transit, whatever the actual elements of the construction are, it has to be inclusive for everyone. I think that's how you build the coalition, because you have the Americans with Disabilities Act coalition, you have the climate coalition, you have a number of people who are very interested in public-private partnerships. But to be clear on that, not where you're dealing in something like nuclear, for example, which not only is not renewable, not only is still dangerous in my view and concerning, but also it's something that for which utilities can't get insurance. So I'm thinking, well, if you can't go out into the marketplace and get insurance for what you want to build, why do you want Debbie and I to be your insurers? Why is it that when you're talking about some of this new construction is contemplated in ways that are still dirty energy? So that's not going to work. You're going to obviously have to have a balance. You can't say you're not going to have any. But if you move towards the goals of the Paris Accords, I mean, again, you can't call it the Paris Accords. You can't call it climate action among certain circles because the Republicans won't vote for it because they'll feel that they can't because they'll be primaried by somebody who doesn't have the benefit of Debbie's coalition to help them. But the fact of the matter is, when you look at somebody like the Koch brothers, they can invest what they said they would invest, which is over $400 million in House of Representatives races alone in 2018, because for them it's return on investment. If they look at oil shale reserves in the United States and they think we can make billions of dollars from extraction and fracking and all the rest, if they feel that they can make billions of dollars, then what's $500 million? It is worth the return on investment. And so that's what we're up against. It's not that we're up against the value of an idea. It's that we are up against two things. One, the fact that you have enormous amounts of money that's going to be spent to try to influence the debate. And second of all, they just passed a tax bill that takes a lot of money out of the Treasury that could have otherwise been used. So we're going to have to see members of the Republican Party believe that they can go to ribbon cuttings in their districts that represent the creation of jobs in their communities. And if you can make it a jobs bill, then I think it has a chance of getting passed.
Debbie Dooley, climate is your number one issue. Donald Trump is your man, and yet he has done a lot to revive fossil fuels and has been very detrimental on the climate issue. So help us understand your number one issue. The person you back has a very different view than you do.
Well, I looked at other issues as well, and I also believe in the tax bill, I don't think solar was hurt, if I'm not mistaken, in the
a lot of the green energy things made it through. People were worried they made it through because of Republican support in Congress and elsewhere. Yeah.
They did. So, and that was good, but I disagreed pulling out of the Paris Accord. Donald Trump can say whatever he wants to and push coal. The bottom line is that boat has sailed. It will never... It will never be the king that it once was. And that's because the grassroots, elected officials, listened many times to the grassroots. And if we speak loudly enough, we can have a bigger influence than like the Koch brothers and their money. And I've been involved in battles and, especially in Georgia and in Florida, and we were against a lot of deep-pocketed special interest when it comes to solar. And guess what? We won because the people wanted it. The people spoke out forcefully enough. So I think that with the solar tariffs, I strongly oppose that, but I saw Donald Trump give a press conference where he talked about, well, we're going after China, and then he started praising solar manufacturers in the United States that he wanted to bring them back. So I think he will eventually get the message. It doesn't matter. I mean, he could go out and pronounce that, hey, coal is at the level it once will. We're going to get it back. No, you're not. Okay? Just like I said, that ship is sailed. It will never be king because people want individual freedom. They want clean energy. I have heard from so many people. And I can tell you something else. I heard from a man when I posted a New York Times story on Twitter. I think his Twitter handle was MAGA Don for Donald Trump. He said, I love clean energy and I want clean energy, but it's so high I can't afford it. And that's the thing. We need to put money invested in innovation and research, because that is it's a climate issue, but for me, moving to a decentralized grid structure is a national security issue. There is nothing more centralized in our nation, nor more vulnerable to a terrorist attack than our power grid. There was a report that was released. It was the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission that found that terrorists could take down 9 of the key substations out of more than 54,000, and it would cause a blackout from coast to coast. So rooftop solar helps keep us safe. I envision an America where everybody can afford rooftop solar, where we are self-sufficient. Imagine how millions and millions of homes with rooftop solar would reduce our carbon footprint. That's the America I envision.
Well said.
Thank you.
So Debbie Dooley, I want to ask you, you used to be on the board of the Tea Party Patriots. You're not now. Hearing you talk the way you are, do you get, how does the Tea Party view you now? Do you get blowback from some of your Tea Party friends saying, Debbie, you've kind of gone off the reservation?
No. I mean, to be honest, no. But I can remember during, I think it was President Obama's State of the Union address. It was probably his last State of the Union address. He kind of referred to me, when he said, hey, in Georgia, Tea Party members agree with me on energy. My text message on my phone, President Obama just was talking about you in his State of the Union address. No, because when you stop and think about it, the key is education. When people find out the facts, they're totally on board. They don't like electric monopolies. If you go into a conservative or Tea Party meeting and you make the big corporations or the electric monopolies the bad guy instead of the Kentucky coal miner the bad guy, you're going to have a much more receptive audience. And I'm having great success among Tea Party activists.
Let's look ahead to big election year, Christine Pelosi, 2018. Democrats seem to have some winds at their backs. What do you think is going to happen in this political year?
I think in this political year, the Democrats are going to win because we are riding a wave of people who have channeled their concerns. The people who came to the Women's March, went out to the airports to protest the ban, were in the Science March, the Tax March, all of the various marches that we had going on last year. Now those are campaign rallies of people running for office, and I just think that's where the public is. They're looking at it and saying we should have checks and balances. In Washington, D.C., there ought to be a check and a balance on the administration. And I also think that our candidates, a lot of them are new to politics. So a lot of them, for example, are taking the pledge to not take corporate money or not take fossil fuel money or not take nuclear money or not take tobacco money, and just saying, I'm gonna stand up and fight with moral clarity. And I think that's what the voters want to see. So it'll shake up both parties, but I think in the shakeout, Democrats will come out ahead. You grew up in Louisiana, the Deepwater Horizon. Tell us, what's happening. Louisiana is feeling a lot of impacts with coastal erosion, sea level rise.
Yeah.
The news has moved on from the Gulf Coast from 2010, but is this impact still being felt there with the people you know?
Well, just recently, just within the past year, there was a bipartisan group of elected officials in Louisiana that are suing the big oil companies over erosion of the marshlands. And the reason marshlands are important in Louisiana is because when a hurricane comes slamming in from the Gulf, the marshlands are a buffer. They kind of help slow the hurricane down. So I'm about to be involved in a net metering fight in Louisiana. But people are deeply concerned because if you look at the map, satellite images, you can't say that the marshland and coastlines aren't evaporating. So, people are waking up. It's taking them time, but conservatives are waking up when it comes to that.
And some of the people most affected are contributed least to it because they're either low income, either
Right.
domestically or overseas, and they're least equipped to deal with it. So, Christine Pelosi, how's this country going to adapt to climate change and make sure the people who are kind of disadvantaged in the brown energy economy are helped in the green energy economy? Because the people who are least equipped, contributed least, are suffering first and worst.
I think that's exactly right, and and where I started with my story about the cookies and the farm workers, because it all goes back to that. If you look at the people in the poorest communities, that's where the power plants are. That's where the fracking is. That's where that's where they're going to drill. That's where the extraction is happening, and without compensation to the people, it's a real public health hazard. Whether you're talking about dirty water, whether you're talking about filthy air, whether you're talking about even the people that are hired to go in and do the cleanup, who aren't given the protective gear to go in and do the work, and then end up with environmental illnesses for which they don't have health care. So I think that there are a couple of things that we have to do. Number one, I know the Tea Party isn't a fan of this, but you really do have to expand Medicare for all. You really do have to have universal health care as a right and not a privilege, and make sure people have access to it. You've got to have those community health centers that are going to be present there. You have to have treatment for diabetes and asthma and the other conditions that people have in these very poor communities. You're also going to have to talk about climate equity and climate justice, and make sure that when you're talking about the renewal, going back to that potential, hopefully not ephemeral infrastructure plan that actually creates jobs, that it is jobs where people are not only good paying jobs with health care, with the protective gear, but also that you're building out sustainable neighborhoods and affordable housing, so that once you renew a place, that people can afford to live there. One quick story: we went to the DNC went to New Orleans 6 months after Katrina.
Right.
And when you go downtown in New Orleans 6 months after Katrina, the French Quarter, it looked beautiful. You could barely tell that something had happened. Few small businesses shuttered, but other than that, it looked like the French Quarter. On the other hand, we went to the 9th Ward, and it was as if it had happened yesterday. Cars still twirled up in trees, homes, because people didn't have the resources to rebuild. The government wasn't providing the resources to rebuild. And not only that, but families were very, very concerned about the rebuilding, because here you had largely African-American families, so there's certainly racist policy involved. But also, rather than being a renter's community, these were homes that housed 2 or 3 generations of families all within the same home, the only source of wealth for the family and the only source of housing for many generations of the family. So rebuilding the neighborhood meant rezoning them out of everything that they had, and there's no way you can compensate for that. So I think when we talk about renewal, we talk about affordable housing and green housing and all that, it has to include people who are poor, and it has to include living wages with health care for people.
We're talking with Debbie Dooley and Christine Pelosi at Climate One at the Commonwealth Club. We're going to go to our audience questions. Welcome.
Thank you, Holly Kaufman. Debbie, you've talked a lot about how facts have changed your mind and changed the mind of other people that you work with. How come facts about the science of climate change aren't changing people's minds, and we have to dance around with legitimate words like energy choice and freedom? Why can't we talk about the facts, and why aren't those facts changing people's minds?
Because conservatives have been told for years that man's not damaging the environment. And as far as I'm concerned, most people, this is a key. I think it was Jay Faison released a poll a few years ago, and it danced around that question, and it asked the question, do you believe in climate change? And, big majority said, no, this is Republicans. But he turned around and asked the question, do you believe climate change has always been, in cycles, but man's making it worse? Double the response agreed with that. And for me, I don't want to get caught up on why you're working and why you support renewables. I just care about the results. And I just, if you want to put solar panels and push solar panels because you think they look good on your house, and you're willing, and you're willing to work to advance them, that's all I care about.
So as a kid, I've been told that I'm going to be leading, or our generation is going to be leading the country soon, but our political stance on climate change and solar energy doesn't seem to be moving much. Where do you hope to see that your parties go in the next, let's just say, 20 years when I'm going to be grown up and doing something? Where do you hope to see your party's stance in renewable fuels and how we change climate for the better of our country and for future generations?
Thank you. Christine Pelosi, it's often thought that these are not voting issues. It's one thing to say I'm for this, but when people go to the ballot box,
I agree.
it's not driving their decision.
I would say two things. First of all, there's a lot you can do now. When I was growing up, I was Generation X. So my generation, we did more recycling than registering to vote. Looking back, that was perhaps a mistake. So I think that one thing that you can do now is get involved now. I mean, there are things that you can do now to make sure that you push. If you go to school or you're active in a club or an organization, ask how climate friendly they are. What's the carbon footprint at your school? What's the carbon footprint of a club or an organization that you're a part of? What can you do to act locally that has a global impact, but also has an impact on the adults in your community, your caregivers, your guardians, who are voters. So I would say don't wait, because if we wait 20 years, if you're just recycling now and then registering to vote later, like my generation, we're going to be even farther behind. So do what mine didn't and get involved now and push people now on where you want them to go. JFK famously said, to govern is to choose. So people need to make a choice now about what's going to affect your future. So whether it's your school, whether it's your organization, whether it's your community, you should go and ask your elected officials what they're doing right now. In California, there's something called SB 100, Senate Bill 100, where we're trying to get to 100% renewables. You can write your representatives, and you should, and say, hey, I want a future that's 100% renewable, and you, as my leader, need to vote for that, and not only vote for it, but push for it. And also, finally, I would say, if you are part of any group or a class, I remember when my daughter Bella's kindergarten class wrote to their congresswoman about they were very concerned about water pollution and wanted to know what she was going to do about it. So even kindergartners can make an impact in what happens in their lives. And Nancy Pelosi wrote them back and told Room 404 the things that she was doing to try to affect their lives. But the fact is, it's important to have that accountability. So don't wait. Hold us accountable now.
Debbie Dooley, quickly, we're getting to the Debbie Dooley.
Quickly, I see a clean energy future. Just like I said, I envision that solar and renewables are going to be cool because the people are demanding it.